Hello, Professor.
Hey, Martha.
Hi.
Hey, Rayla.
Hello, Professor.
Hey, is it Fazal who's talking?
Yeah, yes, Professor.
Hi there. How you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you, sir?
Okay. Here we are. Week 5. We're doing our thing. Week 4. I don't even know, but I'm okay.
That's good. That's good to hear.
I'm happy. For a minute, it was just me and Martha. We'll see. We'll see. I'm very interested as this second semester of online. I feel like classes get smaller and smaller, but we'll see what happens here. So while we're waiting, I'll wait just like usual about 5 minutes to see if anybody else comes in. We've got only 4 people. Any questions since it's our little tiny little class here? Any questions I can answer while we wait before I get started with our plan for today? All right, silence is good. Today I'm going to introduce the first big writing project, so there will probably be questions when that happens.
Professor, while we're waiting,
Please.
the connection between culture and language.
Yeah. It's a big topic. Have you been thinking about it, or do you have anything to add? I can't tell you there's one perfect answer, but it is something I'd love to think about. What's on your mind?
Well, that's why I ask, like a simple idea about this, like how can it be connected or like.
Well, you know me. You now it's been a month. You know me. I'm going to ask, what do you think? Before I tell you what I think, I'm going to make. What do you think? I mean, there is no simple answer, of course. I mean, it's you could spend your whole life researching this question, and people do. But what do you think?
Exactly. The only thing that I thought of was, I mean, human beings, they are born,
Hmm.
and so they usually they're born without language,
Yes.
and then they pick up the language in whichever environment they grow up and learn to speak.
Yes.
So it doesn't matter which culture or which language his or her parents belong to.
Hmm.
But if the child is grown up somewhere else, the child will pick up the language of
Yeah.
that environment.
True. I think that's true. I think you're right. I think the idea you have there is that sort of humans will learn the language no matter what. And I think that's true. And then I think some people might say, well, different cultures, different languages, and the idea is sort of that your language and your culture sort of shape or change the way you think, right? Again, this is not a like theory of language class. I'm just introducing some of these ideas to help, again, help you build critical thinking skills and to think about language and literature in hopefully new and different ways. But there are people, like I said, who can spend their whole life sort of imagining, okay, a very famous example as I would be, well, this example actually really works with many of our students because so many of you guys are from hot places, sort of warm places. There's this
Yeah.
theory that in colder places, languages that in Russia and sort of more traditional cultures that live way up north have more words for different types of ice, different types of snow, right? And the idea is, well, if you live in a place or you live in a culture where snow, ice, cold are such an important part of your daily life, well, that will change the language and that will change your thinking, right? Because if you're from a country that's very cold and you have 7 different words for seven different types of snow, then the
Mhm.
way you think about the world around you, some people would argue, is different than people who don't have those words. Does
Mhm.
that example make sense?
Yeah, yes, but uh, I mean, how can I describe it with a culture? For example, if I'm talking about a certain tradition in my culture,
Yeah.
so how can I put the part of language there?
I love that. I think that's really interesting. And I think most people who think about this, like I said, like for if you are a person who thinks about a theory of language, I think most people will flip that order a little bit, Fazal. So instead of saying, how does language directly affect the culture? I think, and of course, the relationship goes both ways, right? But I think most people would ask, okay, how does the culture affect the language? So, to a certain extent, you do need to kind of know the history of that culture and ask yourself, okay, well, if I think about how this culture developed, where it came from, how could that affect the way the language, came to be? I'm gonna just put a link to a YouTube video in here. This one's in Spanish. Let's see if I can find a short video here. 15,000 views. This one's better. So we won't watch the video, but it's only 3 minutes. I'll put it in the chat. And there was this very famous sort of teacher and sort of linguist and a person who thought about language and literature a lot. Sapir was his last name, Dr. Sapir. And this was sort of his theory, the question you're asking. So I'll put it in the chat and maybe I'll post it in Canvas if anybody's interested in Fazal's question, because like I said, you know, you could spend a lifetime thinking about this question. So I'm glad you're thinking about it.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you.
Of course. I think even if I can't give you a perfect answer for what is the exact connection, I do think, I hope that you'll start to notice and ask yourself that question when we read. You know, we're going to start with narratives today, first person stories, people talking about their own life experience. Well, of course, the language that they use to tell their story, I do argue, is connected to their culture and where they came from. And this will be very interesting when we go to poetry, because we're going to read translated poems. That's another reason we thought about translation, which is, okay, well, what's happening here? Like, obviously, the words that the poet chooses to express their emotions come from their culture, come from their language, come from their history. But then what happens when it gets translated? And again, I'll say, I know I've said it several times here, but this is not one of those like, teacher, give me the right answer so I can answer the question on the quiz. That's not what this type of question is. It is sort of just a chance for you to practice this sort of critical thinking skill that's part of the student learning goals for the class, if that makes sense.
Perfectly, Professor.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I'm biased. I love big questions with no perfect answers. That's what I like talking about.
Well, that was a great idea, Professor. Thank you.
Good. I'm glad you're interested. I'm glad you find it interesting. Yeah, so let's get started for today. Thank you, Fazal, for your question and for just for being here. And thank you to everybody. Thanks to Marta and Rahila and Wenchen and Noor for being here too. Here's my plan for today. I've got a warm up. It's kind of connected to what Fazal's question was, talking about stories, because today I'm going to introduce first person narrative writing. I'm going to talk about the structure of this type of writing, right? How to write this way, right? When I say a narrative, what does that mean? What does that include? How do you read a narrative and understand the structure of that narrative when you read it? And then, of course, after you understand the structure, I'm going to ask you to write, you know, in that structure. We have an example narrative that I want to go through today. We'll see how much we can finish, called The Anthropology of Myself. That's the name of the story, the example narrative. And then at the end of the class, I'm going to introduce Major Writing Project 1. I'll tell you more about it, of course, as we finish up, but it's due 2 weeks from today. So if you're here in the room with me, thank you. If you're watching the recording, 2 weeks from today, first draft is due. So I hope you will watch the video, email me or text me if you have questions about the assignment and about the structure that we're going to practice for this first big project. So I got to grade some more things that were in Canvas, including the first 2 discussion activities. And of course, I was asking you to think and write about stories in one way to get you ready for this first major writing assignment, right? Help you start thinking about not just language and culture, like Fazal's great question, but of course, the connection between language and culture and stories, narratives, since that's where we are beginning for this first big writing project. So I didn't know how many people would be here, so how many small groups we would have. But what I did for the warm-up is to take some of the questions that people wrote for the first discussion and the second discussion that I thought were really wonderful and really interesting. And our warm-up today, I just want to talk about this together for a few minutes, and then I want to start talking about narrative structure. So some great questions from students that I loved reading and thinking about. So Rahila asked, can a novel change people's lives or their ideology? Love that question. Abdul asked, is there any difference between fiction and real stories? Faima asked, what makes a good story? That's a big question, but I think really interesting to think about. Naji asked, how can reading a story make you a better writer? Naji, if you're watching the recording now, I'm going to answer that question today. When you start to notice the structure of stories as you're reading, I promise it helps you be a better writer because you understand what you're supposed to do, right? How to use that structure when you're writing for yourself. And then Ruba and Daryl, I loved their questions about Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's Danger of a Single Story video. Ruba asked, have you ever believed a single story in your life? And can you give an example? And Daryl asked, is the media considered to be biased and helping to create single stories? I mean, we could talk about just one of those questions for the whole class today, but just as a warm-up, my plan for today is I'd love to hear from you. If you can, unmute yourself or type in the chat. Maybe just answer whichever one of these questions is most interesting to you today. I'd just love for you guys to share a little bit with each other. And like I always say during the warm-up, remember, you're not doing this class alone, right? I'm not teaching this class alone. There's 21 people in this class who are doing the work and thinking about these ideas. And I know at this moment in time, for me at least, I feel it's hard to remember that we live in a social world, that we are human beings connected to other groups of people, since we're all still sort of in lockdown mode. But that's the purpose of the warm-up, is not for a perfect answer, but just to hear other people's voices about some of these ideas we're thinking about. So who would like to go first? Just respond to one of these questions briefly, and then we'll move on to the narrative for today. So who'd like to go first? You can unmute yourself, you can type in the chat, you can raise your little blue hand, whatever you want to do.
About the first question, Professor, can a novel change people's lives or their ideology?
Yeah, what do you think?
Well, sometimes in those novels, there are things that doable, you know, it seems doable, and people try doing that, like some of the movies that we have seen based on scientific research, and then not exactly, but somehow in resemblance to those fictitious stories or movies, we have seen some research, or the scientists have worked on those ideology.
So I love this. So I think what I'm hearing, the idea is that in stories, maybe they're fiction stories, maybe they're movies or they're books or something, and there's an idea in them, and that inspires other people to learn more about that idea or research that idea. Is that sort of what you're getting at?
Yes, Professor.
That's cool. So I love that. I mean, that makes me think about sort of fantasy novels and science fiction novels, of course, science fiction books and movies, which these stories kind of imagine the future. And then sometimes, people are inspired by that, or people want to try to make that future happen. I mean, so certainly science fiction, which I love. I mean, I love science fiction. Yeah, can affect the way people think or imagine the future, and that can change their actions in the present moment. That's a really interesting answer. Fazal, I love that. I love it. I thought about Rahila's question in a different way, but I love that answer. Great.
Thank you, Professor.
Yeah. How about Rahila, Martha, and Chen, Noor? Anything about what we just talked about, or answering any of these very interesting questions? And again, if you can't speak, I understand, but please, even something in the chat would be great.
Regarding, I will answer, is there any difference between the fiction and real stories?
Yeah.
I think the real stories, it's based on true facts. Fiction is more imaginaries, more imagination, and which is more interesting than real stories.
Okay, that's cool. So, and I was going to ask if that changes how you feel when you read. So it sounds like fiction is, the word you said there was interesting, right? You feel like imagination, more fiction is a little more interesting for you as a reader. Is that right?
Yes, and it takes you to different places than you never think of before.
Oh yeah, I love it. Especially, like I said, science fiction and fantasy. Those are fiction. Those are types of fiction that literally imagine a world that doesn't exist or a future that may or may not happen. So yeah, I think that's right. I think that's right. That's really interesting. That's cool. Thank you, Nor. Wen Chen, Marta, Rahila, anybody else?
And me. The last question is the media considered to be biased in creating a single story?
Yeah.
Yes, it's the most biased. Um, I think it create a lot of bias,
Yeah.
and they tend to exaggerate the things, make it seem something that it's not there.
Yeah.
I remember I read article about um, Martin Luther King Jr. and
Yes.
one of the reasons the police officer it was in the march when he was doing the march or
Yeah. The March on Washington. Yeah.
yeah,
Dr. Martin Luther King and the March on Washington. Yep.
yeah, so the media play a important role for the police to act violent towards the people that were marching. So
Yeah.
yeah, I do believe it's very biased.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's very interesting, Martha, too, because, and then there's even a deeper question to Daryl's great question, which is, okay, is the media trying to be biased? I think sometimes. And I think sometimes the media isn't trying to be biased, but then people react to the media, right? People react to the story and they sort of create their own bias, right? And this is a little bit the difference between propaganda, which is when someone kind of knows they're lying or knows they're creating a specific single story and they're sort of selling that propaganda. That is very clear bias. And other times I think, it happens in our daily life too. We're trying to do our best, but we make a mistake or someone takes something we said the wrong way, and then that can have big impact. So I agree, Martha. I think, and we'll get to think a little bit more about this question of single story in our own life next week and as we start to write. But I think for me, I always say the example, I lived in Colombia for a year. I got to teach at university in Colombia, and Americans have a very specific media-based single story about Colombia. It's so dangerous. It's a drug country. Everyone in Colombia is on cocaine. I mean, like people, when I said I was moving to Colombia, it was amazing. I think someone else, not someone who's here, but forgive me, if you're watching the recording, I forget who was writing. This student was saying they were from Iraq. And anytime they tell Americans they're from Iraq, Americans have a very specific single story, about what Iraq is like. It's camels and deserts and poor people and blah, blah, blah. And where does that come from, right? Does that come from a specifically biased media or just bad stories in the media? It's a big question, but I do think, Daryl, great question, and Martha, great answer of, yeah, I mean, the answer is yes. I think the media, the internet, all of these things affect the way we create or we understand stories about culture, about countries, about religion, about all of these things. Absolutely, absolutely. Media is, especially these screens, you know what I mean? Especially since the media now means our phones. When we have a little TV in our pocket all the time, man, the power of the media cannot be overestimated, I think. Yeah, I agree, Martha. I agree. Rahila Wen-Chan, you're the last two to go about this media question or any of the other questions. What do you think?
I think about the fourth question, how can reading a story make you a better writer?
Yeah.
I think reading a story has a positive effect in our writing when we write stories, but we know how we can write a story, especially about how can we recognize story and I don't know the.
Good, you're doing great. Rahila she ran out of English words for it. It's like I'm talking, my brain stopped. Okay, I'll ask you one more. I love the word you said, recognize there, Rahila. I love that. And can I ask just more general question too? For you, just in your experience, Rahila, I'm not looking for a perfect right answer. What for you, what is the connection between reading and writing? Do you think they go together? Are they totally different skills? How are these things connected for you in your own experience?
I don't.
Any answer? I don't know is a totally okay answer. It's a big question, but any beginning of a little baby idea, the connection between reading and writing for you? That's okay. That's okay. Thank you. Thanks for unmuting yourself and talking. No problem. No problem at all. I'll just emphasize or repeat what Rahila said there about learning to recognize things when you're reading. If you start to become more aware of things, if you recognize more things when you're reading, that could be recognizing ideas, that could be recognizing structure, that could be recognizing, oh, when I write about this thing, I should use this verb tense because I noticed that the authors that we're reading use this verb tense to describe this type of situation in the past, right? When we become more aware of what we're reading while we are reading it, a lot of cool stuff can happen. a lot of learning can happen, and then we get to try, right? Then we get to apply what we learn and what we recognize in our own writing. Again, and it's not always that clear, right? It's not like cause and effect. Learning is a circle, right? It's not a straight line. So great. Wen-Chen, you're last. If you're there, I'd love to hear any of your ideas about these questions.
So I was thinking about is there any difference between the fiction and real stories?
Sure.
I think the real story give people more real emotion, and the fiction they will give you kind of imagine like a picture, so you think about it.
I love it. So when Chen was sort of saying what we talked about earlier, you do have some imagination in fiction. You get some feeling of imagination or maybe creativity. But for you, if a story is real, if it's a reality, you feel more emotion. Was that the word you said?
Yes.
Can you think of I'm just curious, an example or what type of emotion, or is it only real stories that are happy or real stories that are sad? Is there a difference? Does it matter?
So it doesn't matter because the real story is kind of like if you're it's close to our society. So it's kind of like it doesn't matter the sad emotion or happy emotion, or somebody have people lives getting tough might be closer to your life, so they can give people I don't know how to say it.
I love it. Everybody's running out of English words today. We're not used to speaking anymore. It's all computer time. It's all computers all the time. When we have to talk, it's like No, I love that idea. So you answered my question, Wen-Chen, already. You said it doesn't really matter the type of story, happy, sad, whatever. If it's real, it has a different impact on you. It affects you in a different way. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I love it. Interesting. I'm very curious, we'll move on, but I'm curious if everybody feels that same way, or I think at different times in my life, now I'm just sort of answering this question myself. I think at different times I agreed with Wen-Chen. I thought like, oh, real stories affect me more, like they feel more real. So therefore they affect me more. It's very interesting. I turned 38 last year. As I get a little bit older, and please God, I'd love to live even longer. But as I get older, I don't know, this is changing for me a little bit. I feel like fiction almost affects my emotions even more somehow, because I know it's not real. I can open myself up to it, or I don't even know. I don't know. I'm running out of, so Rahila Wenchen, don't worry, I ran out of words too. I was trying out a new idea, and then I just ran out of English, and English is my first language. So I don't know. I would just say I used to agree with Wenchen, but it's starting to change. Now fiction is almost affecting me more. I don't know. For right or wrong, I don't know. Like I said, so don't feel bad when you run out of words. I'm the teacher, and I ran out of words to just try to describe my idea there. Great. Well, I loved hearing all of your voices. Like I said, it's very good for me to remember that I'm not just teaching alone in a vacuum. It's really lovely, lovely to hear your voices. Great, great, great. So if you're watching the recording, hopefully some of these ideas were interesting to you. I'm thinking now again about Fazal's question at the beginning. These questions don't really have specific, perfect yes or no answers, right? But when we think about them, I think to Naji's question, when we become more aware of these things, ask ourselves these type of questions that can help us recognize things when we're reading more, become more aware as a reader, and I think ultimately that will help us as we're writing. As a way to transition into that, right, into our writing. So the first major writing assignment is coming up. You're going to have a first draft due in 2 weeks, right? And what is a first person narrative, right? If you're in 350, you've probably done some kind of narrative writing earlier, whether in your first language, second, third, fourth, whatever English, I'm not sure. But just for maybe people, maybe your teachers who, maybe they gave you a narrative writing assignment, but they never sort of explained or defined what a narrative is. So I did want to do that really quick, talk about the different structure, and then look at an example, because I think that's the way humans learn, is examples. So a first person narrative, and I'm just going to read the description here on the screen. So a first person narrative is a type of creative or academic writing that expresses the relationship between the writer's past experience and their identity, right? The objective, the goal in this type of writing is to show the reader how the story being told is directly related to who the writer is today. Teacher mistake, and I need to fix that typo. Thank you, Professor Jeff. The writer does this by telling a story. They introduce a theme, describe their thoughts, feelings, and experiences, and then return to this theme throughout the narrative, right? So what I'm going to teach you guys today is that really to write a first person narrative, there are 3 things you need to focus on: theme, descriptive writing, and narrative writing. Okay, but before I move on, I want to make sure that this first sentence makes sense. A first person narrative is a type of creative or academic writing that expresses the relationship between the writer's past experience and their identity. Does this make sense? If not, stop me now. That word identity is a big word, but does that idea make sense?
Can you explain about their identity? What is that refer to? Actually?
Yeah, what is identity? That is another big theoretical philosophical question. Anybody else want to answer this question? What is identity? If we've never seen this word, we can look up the definition, but what is identity?
I know what does it mean because it describes yourself.
Yes,
And
exactly.
explain, but I wonder how it's gonna play in writing a story. You know.
I love it. So that's exactly correct. Identity, let's look up the definition, which I always like to do because it's just helpful. I like the second definition here. So on Learner's Dictionary, it says the qualities, beliefs that make a particular person or group different from others. So a countdown, as children grow, they establish their own identities. She did not want to be known only as the wife of her husband. She insisted on having her own identity. And the meaning there is on being known for her own qualities, her own achievements. And there's a lot of different ways to think about identity. But I think the most basic answer is who you are, right? Who are you? And we did this a little bit in the introduction letter. For me, one way I like to answer this question is who I am in relationship to my friends and family. But of course, in that introduction letter, I could also have written about my identity as a college professor, right? That's a part of my identity. That's a part of who I am. Or I could have told you about my identity as a person who studied theater in undergrad. I studied theater and I was an actor on stage for almost a decade, right? Like I don't do that now, but that's kind of part of my identity, right? So we all have these different aspects, these different parts of our identity. And what I want to make sure is clear, and we're going to look at some examples to make sure it's clear, is the story that you're telling should be very clearly connected to a specific identity, right? So if I wrote a story that was about, I go to the grocery store to buy groceries, that story probably will not have a lot to say about my identity as a college professor, right? Now, if I tell a story about a class that I taught, okay, teaching that class, that makes sense. It will tell you something about my identity as a teacher, right? Or thinking about all of the students in this class, a common thing that people write about when I give this assignment is maybe they write about their experience coming to the United States, right? So I could say that could be connected to a person's identity as an immigrant, or that could be connected to their identity from their home country, or that could be connected to their identity, this growing new identity as an American, right? Whatever that might mean. So instead of asking you to write a nonfiction, right? Like write a paragraph telling me about who you are and what your identity is. Okay, well, my name is Jeff and I'm from California and I'm 38 years old and I'm a college teacher and I have, that is not really a story, right? That's a list of individual sentences that tell you about my identity. What happens with narrative writing, the goal, right, is you tell a story, and when you tell that story, you, the writer, understand what you're trying to share about yourself, who you are. And then the reader goes, oh, wow, I really learned a lot about that person just from that story they told, right? I learned about who they are. I learned about whatever part of their identity is connected to that story. Does that make more sense, Noor?
Yes, it does. That's a lot
Good.
better.
And again, I think with everything in life, I truly believe that examples help. So we'll look at this example together in a moment here, but it was a great question, and that's my sort of attempt to explain it, right? Yeah, that's all I want to say. Any other questions about this before we talk about these individual parts of the structure? Any other questions? Okay, let's go. So like I said, please.
The identity, let's go back to that. It can express your personality and your goals as well, right?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. Especially goals. When you said goals, it makes me think about, again, who am I, right? So sometimes who I am is what happened to me in the past. Oh, well, I am me today because of this thing that happened in the past, right? But you could also say, because of this thing that happened in the past, now who I am this person with this goal for the future, right? So who I am in a certain way is connected to goals, plans, dreams, ideas for the future, right? So yeah, does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's really important because, again, if you're interested in fiction, wait a few weeks, we'll get there, right? And we were talking about fiction as a way to imagine the future, which is fantastic. But when you're doing this type of narrative, first-person narrative writing, you kind of have to use the past tense, right? You kind of have to tell a story about something that happened to you in the past. But to your excellent question, Norm, sometimes what happened in the past, we talk about that to say, well, this happened and this happened and this happened, so now I'm like this. We could also say this happened and this happened and this happened, and now my plans, my dream, my goal for the future are, right? So I think you could definitely do either one of those. That makes perfect sense.
Thank you.
Yeah. So to that end, using that example, so that point that Noor is making there about goals, dreams, plans for the future, this would be connected to the theme, right? And in a first person narrative structure, the theme is very, very important. The theme is what makes it go from being just another story to being a story that actually has real meaning and communicates something important to the reader, right? So the theme is introduced early in the reading. It's usually returned to throughout the writing. Usually there are key words, key ideas, key images that are also repeated or connected to the theme. And then often at the end of the reading, the theme is synthesized or summarized and comes back, is reconnected at the end of the story. Okay, now again, I'm going to keep going. Wait for questions because we need to see some examples of this. Now, in addition to the theme, first person narrative writing also uses narrative writing. That means we need to use first person pronouns, right? This is a big difference, and we're going to see the difference in this between first person narrative writing versus literary analysis, which we'll do at the end of the semester. So in first person, we use I and we, right? This is really important. I, we. Usually in academic writing, you know, in a research paper for 340, 325, you didn't use I, right? You didn't use we. Well, in this type of writing, you have to. And this first person pronoun is used throughout the writing. Narrative writing also means that you tell a story with a beginning, middle, and an end, right? So if you introduce a story to say, okay, I went to the bank one day, well, then you need to tell us what happened before you went to the bank, what happened at the bank, and what happened after, right? You have to have a story with a beginning, middle, and an end. And the story must have a clear connection to the theme. This is what I was saying. So if my theme is about me as a college professor, I would need to make sure that my story was connected to being a college professor, right? Like I said, I couldn't use my example of I went to the bank, I deposited some money, I saw my friend, I said hello, and that changed my life as a professor. Well, it's like, oh, okay, how, right? What's the connection, right? What's the connection between the story you're telling and the meaning and the theme and your identity, right? Then the last thing that narrative writing has to have is called descriptive writing. And this is used throughout the writing. And description means you use a lot of specific details that are connected to the five senses, right? So you say what it looked like, what it felt like, what it smelled like, right? And this allows the reader to see the things that are part of the narrative. And some of these descriptions may be used to help connect the story back to the theme, but maybe not, right? The most important thing here is if you think about a narrative, a story, a beginning, middle, and end, like a skeleton, right? So the bones, the things that help the story stand up, are having a clear beginning, middle, and end. But these details are what actually give the skeleton muscles and skin, and you start to recognize, oh, like I said, my bad example of going to the bank, it's not a very good story, is it? I woke up, I got in my car, I went to the bank, I deposited some money, I talked to my friend, I went home. Okay, I mean, that's a story with a beginning, middle, and an end, but it's kind of boring. There's not a lot of descriptive details, right? I mean, if I'm telling the story, hopefully it has a purpose, it has a theme, there's a reason I'm telling the story. So I would want to include specific details that show why this story is important, right? Now, again, I think the best thing to do is to look at some examples of this together with a real story. But before we look at this example together, theme, narrative writing, and descriptive writing, do these three examples sort of make sense as ideas before we practice them? Any questions? Theme, narrative writing, descriptive writing.
So theme, Professor, theme is more about what are you trying to accomplish? What is your goal in this story, right?
Yes, if theme, yeah, exactly. If this were W340, we'd probably call the theme the thesis, right? The thesis, the theme, this is the main idea. It really answers the why question, right? Why are you telling this story? Who cares? Why does it matter, right? So absolutely, absolutely, Nor.
And the other option was narrative.
Yes.
Narrative writing and descriptive writing, right?
Yes, that's exactly right.
So I'm a little confused about these two, descriptive and narrative.
Right. If you think, oh, go ahead, Nor. I'm so sorry. Please go ahead.
So the descriptive narrative is you're more it's more specific, I guess. It's
Think about it exactly, and think about it this way a little bit. This is not a 5-paragraph essay or a research paper. I want to make very clear. But if you're in this class, you've probably studied research paper structure, right? Think about narrative writing as topic sentences, right? Each paragraph must have a clear topic sentence with a beginning, middle, and end, right? In a paragraph, if you have a clear topic sentence, you're telling the reader, I'm going to talk about this thing, right? I'm going to talk about this idea. And then after the topic sentence, you have details, right? You have supporting details, you have evidence, right? So the narrative writing is what gives the structure to the whole paper, right? Beginning, middle, and end. That's what and again, the other thing to remember here from this slide is I, we, right? My, our. That's the big general information. The descriptive writing part is, again, more like those supporting details. So if I say I went to the bank, then and that's my topic sentence, then I would need some information, probably, right? Some details. What bank? Where? What city? What is happening? Was it a long drive? I need some details that explain to the reader why this narrative, why this topic sentence matters, right? Does that make sense?
yes, thank you. Yes.
Good. Great questions, Nor. Thank you. Anybody else before we look at this example together? Theme, narrative, and descriptive, because what I'm going to do is we'll read through maybe the whole story. We'll see how much time we have, but part of this story, and I want you to practice as we're reading to identify, see if you can recognize, Rahila's great word from earlier, see if you can recognize examples of theme, narrative, and descriptive writing. So I want to make sure these 3 things are clear before we practice together. So anybody else have questions? Cool. If not, then in the chat, I'll show you right now what I'm going to do. So we're going to read through, well, like I said, we'll see how much time we have, but we're going to read through a story called The Anthropology of Myself. It looks like this. If you go, there's a bunch of different ways to find it. It is in Canvas. So if you go to, I'm going to put on student view. If you go to student view, and if you click course materials, PDFs, audio, etc., excuse me. Here in the middle of the page, I've got all this examples of narrative writing. I've also got some recordings of example narratives. There's no PDFs for this, just me reading these examples. So for my students who like to listen and are better at processing information auditory, I've got those recordings. For my students who like to read and practice reading, I've got these PDFs for you. So this one is called Faith Adele, The Anthropology of Myself. It's right here on this page. You can find it there. Also, for my students who are here with me right now, I'm going to post this into the chat so that you can look at it on your own screen if you like. So we'll give it a second. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put this reading up on the screen. I'm going to read through it. And when I'm reading, I'm going to stop and pause a few different times so that we can talk about it. And what I really want you to do as you're listening, as you're reading on your own, what I really want you to be asking yourself is, again, where are examples of theme, narrative, and descriptive writing? And if you're sitting there, if you're in the room with me right now and you're nervous, I'd say focus on descriptive writing first. Examples, description examples are usually the easiest thing for students to recognize. I'm just using Rahila's word over and over. When we're practicing a new type of reading, a theme might be the hardest. Okay, so if you're reading this and you're going, oh my God, Jeff, I don't know what the theme is. Why does this story matter? That's fine. That's okay. We'll get there. Okay, we'll get there. Great. So it's still taking a second to load here. Again, my internet is being very slow. Please forgive me. But any questions again before we practice this together? Any questions? Hey, Ruba, I saw you come in.
Hi.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. We'll let this go for another second. I just want to make sure that if you want to download this, the PDF, and read it by yourself, you can do so. But again, remember, it is here on the course materials page. If you want to find it that way, you can do it as well. So let's give it another second. While it's waiting, again, any questions about narrative structure or anything while we wait for the internet?
Well, there's no, I guess there's no limit of how many paragraphs and you might have. It depends on the story you write, right?
I agree completely, Nor. Yeah, I agree. For the writing assignment, I'm asking like 1,500 words. 1,500 words is about, if you took 340, right? A paragraph is usually about 250 words. So 1,500 words is about 6 paragraphs, 7 paragraphs, so 2 or 3 pages. That's what I'm going to ask you guys to write, right? But I mean, of course, people write whole books that are narratives, right? So people write really short, very, very short stories that tell a narrative. So the length, notice when I showed the structure of narrative writing, right? I didn't talk at all about how long it is. I sort of am trying to show you that the most important things for recognizing narrative writing structure when you're reading is a clear theme, a story with a beginning, middle, and end, and descriptive examples that make the story hopefully come alive to the reader. That's what's much more important than how long it is.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, good question. Almost there. I think it's at how many megabytes? 9 megabytes or something. I am just in the interest of time, just for time, I am going to start reading. So in the chat in a moment, this will finish loading, and then you can download it on your computer if you want. But otherwise, you can download it on Canvas. But I'm going to start reading, so you can read along with me. Okay. So like I said, read along with me. And the questions I want you to be asking yourself are, what's the theme? What's the story? Where are the details? That's all I want. And then I want you to be ready to talk about those when I pause and stop every few minutes, okay? So any questions about what I want you to do? Last call. All right, let's practice. I'm just going to minimize you. I'll tell you right now, usually I have all of your faces on my screen. I can't see anything now. I'm just looking at the reading. So if you have a question, say something or type it in the chat, because I can't see you guys right now. So here we go. This is called The Anthropology of Myself by Faith Adele. We get a little introduction here. Faith Adele was a young African-American woman having a rough time in her second year at Harvard. She signed up for a research project investigating the lives of Thai Buddhist nuns and decided to try the experience firsthand. She got far more than she bargained for. A rainy season retreat of intense introspection in a nunnery of the famed forest tradition. With great courage and fortitude, guided by a wise abbess, she undertook the journey that all serious meditators do, the pains, joys, and hard work of a long time alone with your own mind. All right. So on the first page here, despite. So despite the name Faith, I'm an unlikely candidate for spiritual aspirations. Strangers are surprised to learn that I spent a Lenten season as a Buddhist nun in the Thai forest. Their eyes widen, taking in all of me as mine drop, seeking the floor lights marking the exit. I dread the questions, but even more, I dread my stock answers chanted like an unholy mantra. Yep, I'm not Asian. Nope, I'm not some new ager on a holy trek to the food co-op. Nah, I don't particularly believe in religion. I don't even believe in camping. To complicate matters further, their eyes narrow, homing in on me. I am black, physically soft, pierced, and what they may not know, addicted to African dance grooves, snacks involving processed flour and sugar, good jewelry, and bad television. Friends, too, are surprised to learn the details. It's no secret Faith lacks discipline. She can't even make it to the gym. Forget about enlightenment. Anyone who knows me knows that I couldn't have risen at 3:30 each morning and spent 19 hours a day in meditative practice. Aren't I the one always saying that 7:30 comes but once, dinner time? I certainly didn't go from sitting 15 minutes in meditation to 72 hours at one stretch. How many hours? No, not faith. The only thing to suggest that otherworldliness might be possible is a quaint refusal to smash bugs and an inability to keep shoes on my ringed, painted feet. But that's not enough, is it? Understandably, friends and strangers ask questions. The answers they expect embedded in their queries themselves. Wasn't it hot? Weren't you lonely? Weren't you scared? The answers are all invariably yes. Yes to hot, lonely, scared. Yes to missing physical intimacy in movies and Pop-Tarts. And yes to my fear of everything the phrase tropical forest conjures. Giant spiders and hissing cobras and forest fires and prehistoric monitor lizards. Yes to my fear of everything Buddhist asceticism suggests. A single meal a day, sleeping on wooden floors, meditating on decomposing corpses. Yes, yes, yes. There were times I shuddered and sobbed in a Southeast Asian night so dark I couldn't tell if my eyes were open or shut. Times I detested the Buddha and Asia and so-called personal growth. Times when nothing was more terrifying than the prospect of sitting with the contents of my own mind for 19 hours a day. For many years, I didn't talk about being a Buddhist nun. The reasons varied. For one, the subject presented two great American controversial no-nos, religion and race. I'd been taught that religion was a private, touchy subject. My parents split over their differences, and our own town condemned my family's liberal spiritual beliefs. Added to that, I'd been raised Unitarian, a vague, good-natured philosophy that required little of adherence, save rejection of a trinity, the very thing Buddhism espoused in the form of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. In truth, Buddhism seemed fertile with shame. It wasn't a Black religion after all. God knew my connection to Black America was tenuous enough, given my mixed African parentage, Scandinavian immigrant upbringing, and privileged college life. Spending a year developing an interior life seemed like a luxury reserved for students with trust funds and time to burn. How would indulgent endeavors uplift the race? There was also the shame of having fled America. It confirmed that, like the tragic mulatta of literature, I was, alas, hand to cheek, weak, tainted. Frankly, I didn't need the strange looks and demands to account for myself. Even today, with Eastern philosophies in the mainstream, ordination is an unlikely discomforting topic. Now, the problem in this age of extreme sports, adventure, travel, and radical makeovers is that I haven't changed in the way that people expect. Where I should be uber nun, I'm not even what is perceived as a practicing Buddhist. I don't meditate regularly. I nurse anger. I despise tofu. Damn it, I don't appear to have learned anything. So how can anyone learn from me? How do I begin to explain that though I lived the role more seriously than anything in my life, being a Buddhist nun actually had little to do with being a Buddhist or with being a nun? It was about hacking a difficult path through the jungle, clawing my way from one paradigm to another. The change was the journey itself, and anyone can get there down any trail. This is specifically the story of a silent girl who threw off an overcoat and stripped away everything underneath, a new kind of traveler, the hungry American who set out in search of faith without a map, the sarcastic American who used a journal to write her way through the trees to a new self. It has taken me all this time, more than a decade, to understand the strange decision made one afternoon in the dreaming shade of a Thai temple as pale butterflies knocked against my warming flesh. Despite arising from failure, my decision was an act of resistance, of downright defiance. I chose life, and in telling the tale, I choose it still. The edge of the forest. And then we get another section break here, right? We get a new, if we imagine the organization, we get a sort of title here. So I think it's a good time to pause and stop. We read sort of, 2.5 pages of the beginning of the story. So let's talk. Remember, we are looking for examples of theme, narrative, and descriptive writing. I think we get 2 of those 3 more than the others here. But what did we notice? Let's just go right away. Examples of theme, description, or narrative. What did we notice?
The first sentence seems to me like the theme. Despite the name faith, I'm unlikely candidate for spiritual aspirations.
Okay, well, and tell me why.
So she talks about, like, she's not a religious person and things like that.
Good. I was going to say, Fazal just sort of said this, but remember, if we're, since Fazal brought up theme, remember, usually there are keywords or ideas or images that keep coming up in the story, right? And I think Fazal's exactly correct. In this first few pages, we definitely get religion, spirituality. We understand, oh, wow, okay, if we're thinking about what the theme of this writing is, clearly spirituality and religion. She talks about Buddhism, she talks about Catholicism, she talks about Unitarianism. If we think of some examples of description, right, some specific things that she mentions, but absolutely that spirit, religion, keeps coming back up. Definitely a key word. Definitely a key word. I agree. Anybody else? What did we notice? Anything? We could keep talking about theme. And remember, for a story this long, I'll tell you right now. No, go ahead, Martha. I'll tell you after. I want to hear you guys instead of my voice more. Martha, what'd you notice?
Okay, the part where she say, "I am black," physical soft, peers, and when they may not know addicted to African dance groups, snacks involving processed flour and sugar, good jewelry, and bad television.
Yeah,
I think it's her identity, like the theme.
I love it. I think you're exactly correct. As people, you guys have such good ideas here. I'm going to start to I'm going to take a few notes especially if you're watching the recording, so that you guys can learn from these amazing students who are here helping all of you watching on the recording. Let me make a table here. So what I was going to say before interrupting Martha, and thank you, Martha, because I agree with your example, is in a story this long, you might have more than one theme. You probably will have more than one theme. Now, for you guys, as we introduce this first writing assignment, I suggest keep it simple, right? We're learning a new skill. Absolutely. I don't want you to feel like you need to talk about every aspect of your identity. But if we think about identity here, I definitely think religion, spirituality was one, and race. Absolutely, Martha, right? And then you start to see how these are connected. She talks about religion and spirituality as a theme, but then we do get some details, right? We get supporting evidence. She talks about Buddhism, Catholicism, Unitarianism. These are all sort of specific detail examples of religion and spirituality. And then exactly as Martha just said, she introduces another aspect of her identity. Another part of her identity that comes up in the themes is race. She talks about Africa, Blackness, African music. Right? All of these are examples that she uses to talk about, well, this idea, this theme of race, what is that, right? And how is it connected? Well, she gives us some examples of it. And of course, we will get more examples here as we thinking about how to do this more organized way. All right, while I'm playing with PowerPoint, what else? Who else? What do we notice? Either themes or details or anything? Maybe let's stick with theme. Did anybody notice any other themes? Religion and spirituality, race, anything else that came up this first few pages? I'd especially like us to think about, remember, like I said, usually the theme is at the beginning, right? So I think Fazal's correct, that first sentence introduces this idea of spirituality and religion. But if we look at this first few pages, we could say, this page, both of these pages, right? This first page, page number 2, and this whole page is kind of the introduction for the whole story, because after that, those first few paragraphs, we get a title, right? We get some break in the writing. So I think she's telling us, okay, this is sort of where the story begins, right? But because of that, if you remember, your thesis is usually the final sentence in your final paragraph of the introduction paragraph. I think there's something else going on in this paragraph where she starts to say more than just, okay, this is a story about religion, this is a story about race. But remember, I'm asking you for this first narrative to practice reading and writing about how stories connect to our identity. So this is where she sort of, I think, in this paragraph starts to introduce her personal theme to make a connection to her identity. I'll read this just one more time and tell me, what do you notice? What do you understand? So, how do I begin to explain that though I lived the role more seriously than anything in my life, being a Buddhist nun actually had little to do with being a Buddhist or with being a nun? It was about hacking a difficult path through the jungle, clawing my way from one paradigm to another. The change was the journey itself, and anyone can get there down any trail. This is specifically the story of a silent girl who threw off an overcoat and stripped away everything underneath. A kind of new traveler, the hungry American who set out in search of faith without a map. The sarcastic American who used a journal to write her way through the trees of a new self. It has taken me all this time, more than a decade, to understand the strange decision made one afternoon in the dreaming shade of a Thai temple as pale butterflies knocked against my warming flesh. Despite arising from failure, my decision was an act of resistance, of downright defiance. I chose life, and in telling the tale, I choose it still. So again, this is a complex, no one perfect, clear, easy answer paragraph. There's a lot of dense, interesting ideas here. And I'll just tell you, this is definitely connected to the theme. So what is our understanding here? What is she trying to tell us about her own identity and why this story matters?
I think Professor Jeff, in this paragraph, she explained, is she like a map of the whole stories? Like this is like more general introduction, and then she go more specific on the following paragraphs.
Yes, she does.
Whole picture, it kind of give you like the feeling and the setting, how she go through all that.
I think you're right. I think she's saying, okay, I'm going to tell you this story. She's introducing the story she's about to tell for sure. And I think she also gives us like a hint, a preview of what the story is going to mean when she says things like, the change was the journey itself, and anyone can get there down any trail. Or I chose life, and in telling the tale, I choose it still. We also get this image of the jungle, right? Images and symbols are going to keep coming back the rest of the semester, everybody. Poetry and fiction, these symbols are very powerful. The jungle, she's already talked about this jungle, the forest, several times. So here already she says it was about hacking. Hacking means cutting, right? Cutting a difficult path through the jungle. Now, we may find out that that's literal. Maybe she was literally using a knife to cut through the jungle. But of course, when we tell stories, whether they're personal stories or fiction stories or whatever, true stories or imaginary stories, images, symbols have great power. So there's this image of her hacking her way through the jungle. Do you guys get anything from this? What is she sort of implying, or what is she suggesting that the narrative meant for her? Anybody?
I think that she's trying to tell that she got a difficult time in her life, and she was like trying to escape from that, like going through the jungle.
I love it. I love it. We're going to find out when we read the story, but I love that. That makes perfect sense with what she wrote, Martha. I love it. Anybody else?
But also,
I can say something.
Yes, please, Ruba. I'll have Ruba go first, and then Noor. Please, Ruba.
Just like a description for, I will give you another example. She's just saying that like someone is walking in a way, and he doesn't know what will he face. For example, difficulties and such as like cutting something, or and when he is walking, he doesn't know his goals, where he is going.
I love it. I'm sort of just taking notes here. Walking, cutting through the jungle. Good. So go ahead, Ruba. Yeah, he doesn't know where he's walking. Please go ahead.
That's it.
Oh, perfect. I love it. I love it. Absolutely. I think Ruba was adding and building on some of the things Martha said there. I think you're absolutely correct, Ruba. So those images help give us that feeling of walking, uncertainty, not knowing, challenge, struggle, difficulty, and then to walk or to try to cut through it. Absolutely. Absolutely. Noor, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I think she was trying to say is she was not giving up. She was continue her journey. She wanted to explore, the whole jungle. I would say.
I love it.
She gonna end, or what is she gonna learn from?
I love it. Good. Difficulty, struggle, challenge, journey, explore. Absolutely. And then absolutely, Nor, you're correct. And again, she starts to say, what did you learn from it? Again, I love it. It's perfect, right? And I think as you imagine yourself starting to write these narratives, your own narrative, that is the question, right? What did I learn from this experience? Because what did I learn answers that why question, right? Why are you telling this story? And I'm not saying this about you and your own personal lives, you guys, but like, if you're going to tell a story or write a story, you don't want the reader to go like, who cares about this? Why are you telling me about this? Who cares? Do you know what I mean? Your story, that's what the theme does. The theme answers that question. The theme says, oh, I'm telling this story because it shows something about who I am, what I think, what I feel, what I believe, or what my goals are, where I want to be in the future. Absolutely. Absolutely. Good. I love it. I also added another theme that came up was national identity. She talks about being an American. She talks about being a Black American. So there's also this national identity thing that comes up as well. I love it. Okay, fantastic. So notice beginning, again, as we're practicing learning the structure here, right? Notice at the very beginning, we only talked about theme and description, right? So this is really important to note, you guys, because before you just jump into the story, I woke up, it was hot, I went to the store. Before you just jump in, you do need to introduce some of these themes one way or another, right? Someone tell me, we haven't read it yet, but what's the narrative is beginning, middle, and end. What is this story going to be about? Well, she tells us, right? What's the narrative for this story? Where does she go?
I think she's going to talk about her her experience being like her experience living in a different country, in a different living with people that different religion.
Yep.
And that's it.
I agree. And do you remember, Martha, what country, or anybody else remember, where does she go? What country?
Thailand.
Yeah, that's okay. Details. That's okay. Descriptive writing is details. It's hard to remember all the details. Yeah, she goes to Thailand and she's going to what she, Martha already brought up. She goes somewhere and she, tries a new religion. And does anyone remember what's that religion? She introduces it. She goes to Thailand to do what?
Buddhism.
That's it, right? To be a Buddhist nun. That's kind of the narrative, right? We're going to find out, but beginning, middle, we don't know the beginning, middle, and end yet, right? We don't know the details, but we know, oh, this is going to be a story about she goes to Thailand to try being a Buddhist nun, right? Now, again, that's not the full story. That's not beginning, middle, and end. But even in this introduction, where she tells us about the theme of the description, where we get information about the theme of the description, we understand kind of where the story is going to go, right? Does that make sense?
This story is
Tell me when she.
About even though she knows she's American, but she still want to be a British, even though he know the it's very hard to go through, but he still decide to be a British for the.
I love it. Maybe we'll find out. We're going to keep reading and we'll see what happens. I love it. But I love what Wen Chen said there too, which is this idea that Martha and Ruba brought up also of challenge, struggle. Okay, well, these are big themes, race and religion. Those are absolutely big themes. But maybe even more important is how did all of those different parts of her identity, aspects of her identity, affect her challenge, this journey she writes about, the struggle, the difficulty, the challenge. How did all those things come together to create this experience, right? Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, let's keep going just for time, Okay, I'm minimizing your beautiful faces and voices again, but I'm here at the top of page 43, the edge of the forests. All right. Wat Tam Tong is just as beautiful as I remembered from my first and only visit. Inwardly, I rejoice, so I'm not completely insane. The green and gold landscape, echoing the colors of the traditional Siamese roof, is one solace. Maichi Run Guduan, the head nun of the temple, is another. During my registration, she stands round-faced and smiling, as she has on our previous two meetings, emanating that stolid dignity like a shade I want to rest beneath. Once my Chi Rung Duan sees my friends off, she asks me to join her on the path overlooking the stream. Lowering herself onto a stone bench, straight-backed as always, robes pooling around her, she pats the seat next to her and smiles. Trying to mimic her slow grace, I feel myself plop into place. After searching my face, she raises her eyebrows and gives me a look as if to say, so here we are, now what? I grin. She announces in English, Wat Tam Tong is not a Wat. Somehow I have the sense not to show how much this rattles me. What does she mean, not a Wat? I'm here to study Wat. Perhaps she means it's not like Wat Phra Sing, a fancy royal temple and tourist destination. That's fine. I want a working congregation precisely in order to observe the famed reciprocal relationship between temple and community. Since Tam Tong Mai Chi Thai Buddhist nuns are so well known, I hope to see how much of the standard ceremonial, counseling, and educational functions they provide to lay people in exchange for donations of food and money. This is a retreat center for intensive meditation practice, Mai Chi Rung Duan elaborates. My brain clicks. This is what she was trying to explain the day Ajahn Boon and I visited, only I wasn't listening. Intensive meditation? I asked tentatively. Inside, I'm screaming, I've never meditated in my life. She nods, a gentle fluid bending forward, exposing a crop of dark stubble against an ivory neck. We practice the forest tradition. I nearly bolt from my seat and start down the path. Maybe I can still catch the minivans as they tear up the trail. A forest temple? The rigorous forest tradition, a return to the Buddha's ascetic practice, is the stuff of legend, the obsession of bony hermits in the drought-ridden Northeast, not the territory of beaming, robust women in the Chiang Mai province. In all the Wat I visited in the months preceding my ordination, monks lived relatively comfortable, albeit disciplined lives. They consumed 2 moderate meals a day. They divided their time between religious study, temple chores, and ministry. They came and went freely, accompanied by young novices or lay men who handled their money for them. The streets and roads teemed with saffron robes. Of course, I don't expect to live this exact life. I know that Maichi are often relegated to the Wat ghetto, cooking and cleaning and serving monks to earn their keep. Religious study is generally not open to them, certainly not at the 2 Dhamma universities in Bangkok, and travel is restricted. However, as Tam Tong is known for its equitable and enlightened treatment of Maichi, I expect to experience as full a monastic life as possible for women. This is one of the few places that allows women to practice the forest tradition, Mai Chi Rong Duan says, nodding firmly, a move I recognize from childhood. My mother announcing a new family policy of great morality and equal inconvenience. Monks and Maichi come from all over the country for temporary residence. And of course, this news bite does it, as she might, and my mother certainly would have guessed. Always the cultural ambassador, I plump in the wake of her words. I've stumbled, albeit through no skill of my own, into the situation of the century. A forest temple for women, even better. I am the sole Westerner and first Black resident. The day, she explains, is devoted to intensive meditation practice and mindful chores. Fair enough. She continues, we rise at 3:30 in the morning and do not sleep before 11 at night. My eyelashes flutter like butterflies darting around us. Pardon? 3:30? And I was worried about getting up at 4:30 or 5, standard Watt rising time. My inability to function before 8 a.m. is legendary. And furthermore, how is it possible not to sleep before 11? Are we really expected to function on 4.5 hours of sleep? To devote 19 hours to meditation and mindfulness? Surely there must be a siesta. There's no lying down permitted during waking hours. My Chirongduan volunteers smoothly, as if she can read my little mind's feverish calculations. We eat a single meal, and only liquids are allowed after noon. I feel like I've jumped off the triple-tiered roof and landed on my back, the wind knocked out of me. For weeks, everyone is worried about my ability to subsist on 2 meals a day. I'm not sure whether this concern is an extension of the Thai preoccupation with foreigners' eating habits or a veiled reference to my weight. Whatever the motivation, it's moot now. I have bigger problems. I'm digesting this new situation when my Chirungduan hits me again. The most communication is forbidden. That means no speaking, reading, or writing, except when absolutely necessary. Our mail is censored and our contact with lay society limited. Ajahn Boon and I agreed that yours would be non-existent. My eyes threaten to flood. I've never heard of contemporary monastics taking vows of silence. This is the stuff of myth. I understand the decision to restrict my visitors and letters given the relative brevity of my ordination, but how can I be me and do what I will do if I can't read or write? My purpose is research. Besides, a major portion of ordained life is Dhamma study, so how can reading and writing be forbidden? Again, my Chirungduan anticipates my objections, the approximate time it takes me to formulate them. This will be hard for you, she allows. So perhaps you should keep a journal. I only ask you to restrict the time you spend writing in it. I also ask you to focus on the practice as if you were any other Mai Chi. Then at the end of your stay, you can interview any woman who agrees to participate in your study. She widens her eyes, indentations like thumbs in clay where the eyebrows should be. Is that fair? How can I argue with her logic? I did, after all, indicate a desire to replicate the Mai Chi experience for myself, and she opened her Wat to me, accepting me without question. The least I can do is abide by her schedule. I nod, and she continues her description of life at Damdong, most likely a repeat of what she told us the day I turned off my ears and brain and decided with some unfamiliar part of me that I needed to ordain. Scheduled daily activities consist of 3 things only: communal prayer and Dhamma study from 4 to 5 a.m., sweeping the temple grounds from 7 to 8 a.m., and mealtime at 8:30 a.m. She points to the caves like dark eyes watching us from above. You may remain in your room during Dhamma study. I stiffen my features to remain impassive, unsure of how I feel, knowing how closely Thai women study foreigners, a giggle at the ready. Nonetheless, Dhamma study seems like one of the few opportunities for communal interaction. Do I really want to forego it? I will come to teach you privately each evening at 6 o'clock. It is settled. I cannot refuse such an honor. My presence obviously complicates her life, adding another duty to her personal schedule. She appears not to mind, however. Before leaving, my Chirongduan gives me a brief lesson in the simplest levels of walking and seated meditation. I try my best to focus. For seated meditation, I'm supposed to clear my mind and concentrate only on my breath, inwardly noting the rising and falling of my diaphragm. Distractions, internal or external, are to be noted as they arise. For walking meditation, I should break down each step in walking and make internal note of it before proceeding. Every desire, such as wanting to stop, should be noted prior to taking action. Okay, I'll pause here. So we did 4 pages, 40, 44, 45, and 46. Let's talk again. I don't think we'll be able to finish the whole story, but I definitely do want to talk about what did we notice here. I'll say right away, hopefully you notice big change, right? We don't get a lot of theme writing anymore. We get much more narrative and descriptive writing, right? So I'd really love to hear what you noticed about narrative and descriptive writing. And I'd really like to start with narrative, right? Because we said, okay, this is a story about Faith moving to Thailand to study Buddhism. Okay, great. But what you'll start to notice in longer narrative writing is you have multiple stories, right? If you tell the whole story of when Faith Adele tells the whole story of her experience becoming a Buddhist nun, there are many little stories, many little narratives that are a part of that sort of big picture narrative, right? So we get some of those examples here on these pages. So I'd love to hear what you noticed, what kind of narrative writing, right, beginning, middle, and end, did you see on these pages? Especially, let's just maybe like it here. So what's going on here? This first paragraph and sitting on the bench, and what's going on?
So she's talking about the place. She's telling about her first experience when she goes there.
Absolutely. Fazal is saying she's talking about the place. Absolutely. Remember, a story, beginning, middle, needs a setting. It needs to happen somewhere. And then, of course, we also get some connection between the setting. She's describing things connected to the narrative as well, right? So she talks about the monastery where she is, but then we get details, right? The green and gold landscape echoing the colors of traditional Siamese roof, right? We get lots of words here that give us those details that talk about the 5 senses, forgive me, 5 senses, sound and touch and smell and sight, right? Lots of examples of sight in this one where she's describing what she's seeing. During my registration, she stands round-faced and smiling, right? All these specific descriptive details about what this woman looks like. She has a round face. She was smiling at the time. The forest was green and gold and had those curved roofs, like traditional Siamese roofs, right? So absolutely, Fazal, we learn about where, we get some description about where, absolutely. And I'll ask Fazal or anybody else, with these four pages are the story of what? What happens on these 4 pages that we read? She makes a decision. I'll even help you. What does she decide in these 4 pages?
I think she decided that she's gonna try to memorize more practice while she's experienced, and
That's it.
so when she's ready to present, you don't have to look through her notes. She can just be more natural speaker or more natural provider.
I love it. And even if, it's fantastic, Noor, and even if, I think, I just want to go back to what you said first. This is the story, this is a narrative inside of her bigger narrative about when she agrees to try this, right? To try this meditation, to try becoming a nun, to try working and living in the monastery, right? And the story begins with, her teacher sits down on a bench, a stone bench, more descriptive details inside the narrative, right? She says, what? I got to the temple, we sat down on a bench, the nun told me, here's what you have to do. This is a forest monastery. She told me you only get 1 meal a day. We get more details then. Only 1 meal a day. You wake up at 3:30. You don't go to bed until 11:30. I hope that you can see in these 4 pages how the narrative, beginning, middle, and end, and description in a good story, they go together, right? They really have to go together. So when she says, oh, the head nun, the teacher, told me what my life would be like, well, then we get those descriptive details, right? Then she tells us what the life was like. The other thing I want to point out as you start to think about writing your own narratives is part of descriptive writing, anytime you see quotations, right? She said this, I said this. Here's an example. The retreat center is for intensive meditation practice, Mai Chi Rung Duan elaborates. This is another small example, one sentence here of descriptive writing, right? The author is hopefully helping you, the reader, feel like you're there, right? When you say, she looked at me and she said this, that is descriptive writing. Again, if you think about your 5 senses, it's about hearing, right? It's almost like she's saying, I heard the teacher say, but she just gives us that quote, right? So describing what you see, telling the reader what you heard, what you said, all of these are part of descriptive writing here on this side. But of course, you start to see how they are really, really closely connected, intimately connected to the story, right? To the narrative. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Good. Any question or any other ideas? Let's see. Any other ideas about narrative and descriptive details? Do you notice any other descriptive details? That she uses a lot of descriptive detail here. How about in this paragraph? Oops. How about in this small paragraph here? Lots of details, descriptive details here. What do we see here? What are examples of descriptive writing in this short little paragraph?
Descriptive. It's
Yes.
my eyelashes flutter like the butterflies darting around us.
Definitely. Love it. Absolutely. Also preparing for poetry and fiction later this semester, symbols, imagery, metaphor, right? She uses another image to describe, this is a simile. My eyelashes flutter like butterflies. Absolutely. Similes and metaphors use specific details, specific images to give the reader a feeling. I love it. Great. We got a lot of other descriptive details in here too. What else?
My inability to function before 8 a.m.
Martha is the class hero today. Martha's helping
No.
you out if you're not here. Absolutely. I was going to say, Martha, anytime you see a number, a time, a date, all of those are very specific examples, right? And we get about getting up at 4:30 or 5 a.m. It's one thing to say, oh, I woke up early. That's kind of narrative. If we think about my categories for today, that's like a narrative, right? That's a story. Okay, but we can make it much more descriptive if you say, I woke up very early today. The alarm went off at 5:15. The alarm went off at 4:30 in the morning. Then you're giving a descriptive detail to add to the story. Absolutely. We also have these numbers, right? To devote 19 hours to meditation and mindfulness, right? So again, it's one thing to say, oh, when I went to the monastery, we had to meditate a lot. Okay, that's a narrative. When we went to the monastery, we had to meditate a lot. I had to meditate for 19 hours every day. I mean, now you're getting much more detail, right? Much more specific detail and descriptive information. Does this make sense?
Professor, I have.
Yes.
Well,
Please.
I just want to make sure. So the narrative, it says a specific. So you have to be like really, really specific. Like you say, like if I say I wake up early, you have to say like I wake up at 8 a.m. The song was, it was a cloudy day. It was
Like that.
something like that, like
Sure.
very specific.
Yeah, I think I want to make sure descriptive writing is a specific part. And this is when it gets a little tricky, right? Trying to teach at this higher level, you guys, especially when we start to do poetry and literature, you're talking a little bit about art, not science. Okay, so I can't tell you, Martha, this sentence is 100% pure narrative writing. And this sentence is 100% pure descriptive writing. It's not that simple, unfortunately. Of course, the two go together. And what you see here, Martha, to your great question, is really a good writer does both, right? You could say, I woke up really early this morning, narrative. The alarm went off at 5:15, descriptive, right? And the two kind of go together, right? But what I want you to start to notice, especially as we look at these examples of narrative writing, is even if we say that the theme, the theme for this whole story over whatever, it's a 7-page PDF, right? The story is about her experience in Thailand becoming a nun. Okay, that's the narrative, that's the big narrative. But even inside of that narrative, there are other things. There's like part 1 of that story. I went to the monastery and the teacher told me that I would have to sleep in a cave, and all of that is connected to the narrative. And then inside of that, we get all these specific details and descriptive examples. So I don't know. I didn't answer your question very clearly. I talked too much, but
No, I got it. Thank
okay.
you, Professor.
Yeah, I know I talk too much. It's because I'm gonna be honest always with you guys. I talk too much, but it's also hard to explain what I'm getting at because, like I said, it's not as if I can point to this one paragraph is only narrative and this other paragraph is only description. No, of course they do kind of go together, right? And that's, I think, one of the challenges of reading and writing with this genre. Yeah. Any other questions? Because I think for time, I want to make sure we won't be able to finish the whole story, but it's there in Canvas for you. I highly encourage you to read through it, finish it, think about some of the examples that we've talked about together. I do want to make sure I introduce the major writing project. So you've got 2 weeks. Don't stress. You're not going to have to write this thing. It's not due tomorrow. But before I introduce the major writing project, are there any questions about going through this example together and just generally about theme, narrative, and descriptive writing?
Professor Jeff, on the beginning of the stories, the first paragraph kind of confused me. I just want to know which one was actually the introduction. Is that part of the introduction?
Unfortunately, like I said, as you start to read more, you guys have read longer books now, but as you start to read things that are longer and longer, I would say, honestly, all of this page 40, page 41, and page 42, really all of those, this whole thing is the introduction, right? And then she starts to tell the story here when she says the edge of the forest. Then we get another break here, right? The anthropology of myself. So it all kind of changes, right? Depending on how long the narrative is, you might have one introduction paragraph or a couple introduction paragraphs, or if it's a 20-page story, or if it's a whole book, excuse me, it might be a really sort of long, slow process to introduce some of the themes and the main ideas. And remember, guys, this is one class, so it's not like you're going to be able to understand these ideas perfectly or write a perfect narrative, right? What I'm most interested in, to your good question, Nora, is hopefully you can recognize that in these first couple pages, we do get introduced to the theme. And when you start to write, I want to make sure that before you write, you know what your theme is, and then you choose to introduce that theme at the beginning of the writing. That's the most important thing for this class, Nora. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes.
Cool, excellent. All right, before we run out of time, let's introduce this assignment. So again, you can go to home, you can go to grades, you can go to modules, you can go to assignments, whatever. I'm going to go to assignments. And here on narrative writing, there's 3 assignments within this module. Only 3 or 4 people have done lesson 9 discussion. So I suggest, do it before you start to think about this project. Then I have the invention activity. I'll talk about that in a moment. But first I want to click here on the narrative project. You can see it's weird to see, but there are due dates for 2 things with this project. So all of the instructions are here, but they are also in this assignment sheet in Word document format. I will be honest with you, I prefer the Word document, so you can download it. You can look at the Word document inside of Canvas, whatever is best for you. But I'm going to look at the Word document. The instructions for this assignment are pretty simple, but I want to make sure we go through them together. So you have a lot of freedom here. Oops, I need to delete this. Great. So here are the instructions. For your first major writing project of the semester, I'm asking you to write a first-person narrative essay. This essay should include all the element and structure of narratives as discussed and reviewed in class. The two most important things to remember as you write your narrative are structure and theme, and I'll show you in the grading rubric why that is. So here are the due dates. So there's an invention activity that I'll show you right now. This is a graded lesson in Canvas to help you prepare and begin your writing for this essay. That is due next week. That is the only new thing in Canvas, you guys. I'm not adding any other lessons in Canvas. So it is due 1 week from today, but it is the only thing I'm asking you to do between now and then. Then the first draft for your paper is due 2 weeks from today. So that's February, 24th. I have the correct day in Canvas. I just need to fix it on the document. Forgive me. So remember, this is the only assignment with a date for this class. As a result, barring truly extraordinary circumstances, late work will not be accepted. I can't stress this enough. Please, 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 you guys, with 2 weeks and no other due dates, give me your first draft by this time. It will allow me to give you grading and feedback that will allow you to resubmit. The second draft, then you have 1 week from the date of the initial grading and feedback to resubmit your essay for a higher grade. So what will happen is you do this invention activity next week. 2 weeks from now, you submit your paper. Then I grade that first paper. And when you get your grade, if you want to resubmit for a higher score, you have 1 week after that first grade to revise and resubmit. Now I've been talking about grading. How are you graded? So this essay, this project is worth 200 points. So you are graded on structure, theme, originality and effort, editing, and length. So structure, your writing effectively follows the structure of linguistic and cultural narratives discussed in class and included a theme, narrative writing and descriptive writing. That is half your grade. That is how important this is. Theme. Your writing has a clear theme and it is directly connected to at least one of the language ideologies. Excuse me, we don't need this. Really, this. Does your story have a theme? Again, that's how important this is. I'm giving it 50 points. Originality and effort. Your writing shows originality, careful thought, and obvious effort. Editing, your writing is free of major grammatical and mechanical errors, including capitalization, punctuation, spelling, sentence structure, and verb forms, 10 points. And length, your writing is at least 1,500 words. If your story is at least 1,500 words, you get those 10 points. So that is the grading rubric for this assignment. I see that there's a chat. Daryl was noting that maybe I didn't see this, so if you said this a while ago, Daryl, forgive me. The author used a lot of adjective words, yes. And I'll ask you guys now as we look at the grading here and that structure especially, adjective words. Do we think that these adjective words are most often associated with theme, narrative, or description? What do you guys think?
Description.
Thank you. Wen-Chen is exactly on it. If we're using clear, specific, interesting adjectives, we're probably describing something that we saw or felt or heard, right? So I completely agree, Wen-Chen. So these are the instructions. It really is that simple. You can tell a narrative about anything you want. And if you're thinking, oh my God, I don't know what to do, that's what this invention activity is for. So let me show you what that is in Canvas. I'm going to close this. So now if I go back to assignments and I go to lesson 10, narrative invention. Again, this is called a quiz, but really it's just a way for me to make you think about some of these things. So it's examples like which example narratives, which we read together, which example narrative, aside from the anthropology of myself, which we read together in class, was your favorite? So I'll show you, but I want you to read several of the other narratives. Question 2, what's your favorite narrative? 3, in your opinion, what's the theme of your favorite narrative? Quote and cite one sentence where the author writes about this theme. So more practice identifying, recognizing themes in what we read. 4, what are possible ideas? What are 3 possible ideas you could write about for your first person narrative? So again, this doesn't have to be a whole paragraph. You guys, this could be moving to the US. This could be the birth of my first child. And this could be like the first time I got a poem published, something like this. It could be that simple. Okay, so question 4, just 3 possible ideas. Then what is the theme for each of your ideas, right? So make sure, you know, if you this is why I'm making you do this for points, is I cannot stress this enough. I don't want you to just tell me a story. I want you to know before you take the time is so valuable and precious right now. Before you take the time to sit down and write, I really want you to be clear. What is the theme of the story? When you choose the narrative that you're going to write about, I really want you to know who cares. What's the point? What's the meaning? I really want you to know. Question 6 then is really just a chance for you to sort of think, write out loud. Out of the 3 possible narratives, which one do you think you'll write about and why? Right? So this is called an invention activity because it helps you invent and come up with the ideas that you want to write about for the first draft. So that's what the invention activity is in Canvas. So if you follow the instructions there and sort of finish that activity, you're going to get the points. It's not about right or wrong. It's really just a chance for you to get some points for thinking about what you want to write.
Professor, so do we have to write, we have to read different, 3 different kind of stories, right, to answer this question?
Yeah, no. So you don't, there's 2 so thank you very much. There's 2 things. So the first questions are about which narrative did you like the most? That's when you have to go to course materials and look at some of these examples. So you could listen to these narratives, right? I've got recordings of myself reading 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different examples of personal narratives. And then I've got all these examples of PDFs. So Faith Adele's PDF is here. Then I've also got Amy Tan, Gloria Ansaldúa, Jamila Osman, Jessamine Ward. I've got all these examples of narrative writing. So in the invention activity, when I say which was your favorite, I mean which of these, right? You could choose to listen to any of these, or you could choose to read any of these. So you'd say, oh, my favorite was How to Tame a Wild Tongue, and I liked it because blah, 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 blah. And I think the theme was blah, 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 because the author wrote blah, 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 blah. That's what I'm asking you to do in those first few questions. When I say 3 possible narratives, that means 3 possible stories that you might write about for the writing project. Other questions about the first major writing project, about anything, due dates, grades, anything, questions?
I have a question.
Please.
So the narrative, the essay, the first one, you have to connect the topic, you have to connect what we talked about before in the class, right? Like the translation is important. Yeah.
I tried, it's such a good question, Wen-Chen. I tried that last semester and I feel like it was too complicated. I think I was asking too much from students. So if you have a story about language, I would be so happy. If you have a story about culture and ideology or the danger of a single story, I would love that. But I'm not making you do it because I think for some students, it was too hard to practice a new genre and connect it to new ideas. So it could be a story about anything. Even more important, Wen-Chen, is that your narrative has a theme. That's the most important thing. If you know what the narrative, if you know what theme you're writing about, why it's connected to your identity, I will be happy. Well, I will say you will be happy because that is mandatory. You must do that. If you choose a part of your identity that's connected to language, culture, ideology, or any of those things, then I'll be very happy because you'll be practicing some of the ideas that we started the semester with.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Such a good question, Wen-Chen. Thank you. Other questions?
Can the narrative project, can I write like coming from Afghanistan to America, experience language, cultures, all those challenges, and how did that help me what I am right now?
Yes, that last thing you said, Noor, is the most important. How it helped you become who you are right now. Yes, just make sure this. I'll say this to anybody watching the recording too. Make sure that when I read it, since I'm your audience for this project, right? Make sure that when I read it, you told me who you are. It's not just what it can't be. And this is something that students struggle with when they're practicing this genre is, I had this experience and this experience and this experience, and it made me who I am today, period, end of essay. And I'm saying, and my feeling as a teacher is, but who are you? Who are you today? You need to make that clear. Does that make sense? You have to say,
Yes.
it made me more brave, whatever. It made me more multicultural. It made me more open-minded, whatever it is. You just need to make sure that I, as the reader, understand what that part of your identity is. And I know that for some students, again, if you're watching the video and you're going, Jeff, I don't know what you're talking about. Sometimes it's hard, the difference between saying, this made me who I am. Well, that's different than saying, I am a brave person because of this experience. Those are two different things. One is much more specific and I think much more interesting. So does that answer your question, Nor?
Yes, yes.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Other questions? Cool. This is what I got for today. I don't have anything else to introduce. I really want to just make sure that you guys are clear on these different elements of narrative writing. I wanted to make sure we got a little bit of practice reading through one example. And you know what? As I say this, let me get out of here and leave student view. So keep asking questions, but before you go, I didn't know if we would be able to finish reading the story. So I'm going to go into invention activity right now here. And I think just to make everybody's life easier, and let's be honest, it's really hard out there in the world, so let's make life easy. So if you're watching the recording, which example was your favorite? If you want to write about anthropology of myself, if you want to finish that one and write about this one for, if your answer is Faith Adele's, anthropology of myself, and you want to say why that was your favorite here, and you want to write about the themes that we introduced today, that's fine. Okay, you can do that. If you have time and you really want to keep practicing some of these ideas, I suggest, read one of the other ones on your own. Listen to my recording of one of the other ones and see if you can identify the theme for yourself. But I want to make sure if you want to write about, this one, the one that we started today and the one that we started to analyze together, absolutely, you can do that if you want to do that. So yeah, just make life easy for people who are stressed enough. Any questions at all about this project, about anything? Because that's what I got for today. Because if not, you're wonderful. Get out of here. I'll see you next week. Or you'll see me on the recording since there's only 5 or 6 of you here. Bye, Nor. Thank you everybody for contributing. Thank you so much. I know sometimes people feel like they hate it when they're the only, you can't hide. And when it's only 7 students, it's hard to hide. So thank you everybody for sharing your ideas, your opinions. I really appreciate it. And I really mean this. If you're watching this video recording right now, you guys, you should all thank Ruba and Fazal and Rahila, Martha, Wen-Chen, Noor, and Daryl, because without their contributions, it'd be hard. So I will thank all of you on their behalf. Thank you for coming and contributing and helping the rest of your classmates learn. It's a really beautiful gift that you give. So thank you everybody for being here. I'll see you next week. And if you have questions, I'll stick around, but I'm going to stop the recording now. So bye everybody.
Thank you so much, Professor. Thank you so much for creating such a wonderful learning environment.
Oh, Fazal, that's very kind to say. I'm really glad that it works for you. That makes me happy.